Hi, everyone. Thank you, CyberUK, for having us. This is going to be quite a fun chat about incident response. So I'm looking forward to seeing your questions as well. This time, you may see, we do have kind of a poll. So if you don't mind, the only time I'm going to say it's okay to take out your phone and be on it during this 20 minutes is please complete this survey for us. This helps us understand a little bit about your background. So when we're responding to your questions, we'll be able to get there better. So my name is Messdaghi, and I lead the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Throughout this conversation, you may hear us say MDDR for the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Karen Frost, she is the Principal Security Researcher at Microsoft. And then I also have Meaghan Bradshaw, who is also a Principal Security Researcher, but on the DART side of things, this is detection and response. So, let's see here. Oh, you guys aren't filling out the form fast enough, it looks like here. Okay, all right. Nice. All right, so we have a good number of security management, security leaders, got some policy and government. Oh, this will be perfect for you then. All right, before I begin asking some questions here, raise of hands if you are familiar with the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Okay, nice. For those that aren't aware, it is an annual report that Microsoft puts out, usually in the early fall, and it usually has 200 contributors. And sometimes it could be from 5 to 10 different divisions and teams that do participate in this annual report, which showcases the threat landscape. So I do recommend, do check it out after this. But we look forward to this new one that will be coming out in the fall. So my first question here is to you, Karen. When we look at 2025, how are attackers actually getting in? Why did identity become the favorite front door? And what does that say about how attackers think about cost versus payoff? And how should defenders adjust as a result?
Sure, so I'll take the first of those questions. So when we look at this chart here, I mean, we all know there's only kind of a limited number of ways that people are getting in, right? So over time, the initial access vectors generally remain the same. So I'm interested in how does this change over time? So when I look at this, the thing that interests me is what is the change in the increase in usage? And in this case, we're seeing more social engineering. And I'm going to leave it to Meaghan to talk about kind of like what that means, but something that I think a lot about for as I look forward into 2026 is how is AI going to make that a lot easier for threat actors?
Yeah, so I guess when we took a look at the cost-benefit analysis that these threat actors are doing, one of the things that I find interesting about calling out on this chart is exploiting public-facing applications is the highest number that we have here outside of vectors that we couldn't identify. And one thing to call out is that the data behind this, coming from incident response engagements, is threat actors getting that low-hanging fruit when it comes to public-facing applications and services that haven't been patched. And that's because it's easier to pick it up and do it. But when we talk about like investing longer time, more resources, a higher cost, they'll start moving into other things, and that's why we've got valid accounts, social engineering. It's much easier for these threat actors to shift for, okay, my scanner didn't give me a service that I can get into, so I'm going to focus on the people behind the technology, because it's much easier for them to go and invest in that.
Karen, question for you. Can you guys hear me?
Oh boy. Oof. Do you want me to just read the question for you? Just shout loudly.
test. Oh, there we go. Okay. What does the data actually tell us about who's behind today's identity-based attacks? And as AI becomes more accessible, of course, does that change the picture at all?
So one of the questions that we get asked sometimes is, does it matter who the attacker is? Does it matter if it's nation state or cyber criminal? And it, of course, does matter, but in a way it doesn't. So when we talk about proactive defense, in that sense, it doesn't matter as much, right? A phishing email can come from a nation-state threat actor, or it can come from a cyber criminal. We see both sophisticated and unsophisticated attacks coming from both. So the defense that we create becomes the same. It's that post-compromise behavior where it starts to become more important. Now, what we've got up here is looking at our data to understand, okay, which sectors are being hit by ransomware actors and which sectors are being hit by nation-state actors. And we can see that there is a difference. So depending on what sector your organization is in, you're likely going to be more susceptible to an attack by one type or another. But again, the actual attack is kind of threat actor agnostic, and so the defensive side, right, the proactive defensive side tends to be the same. Now, when we switch to the next slide, this is where things start to get really interesting. Because now we're looking at, again, this post-compromise behavior. Now, what I think is interesting about this is now, this is incident response. Of course, sometimes this is not mutually exclusive, and this is not fully encompassing everything, because obviously sometimes we don't know the after-compromise behavior, but we see that the most common post-compromise behavior is data theft, right? We also see, of course, ransomware on that. When we were able to identify actual, in essence, nation-state activity where we know it's nation-state and we know the goal is espionage, here we're only seeing it about 4% of the time. Now, again, I am emphasizing that this is not an absolute number, but it tells us that relatively, that statistically, the biggest threat that most organizations will face is cyber criminal. And I think that's very important to understand that kind of ratio and that threat level. Again, certain sectors much more susceptible, but in general, your biggest threat is probably going to be a cyber criminal actor, and really probably the biggest threat is going to be some form of data theft.
Meaghan, anything to add?
Yeah, so like from an incident response perspective, that question of does it really matter who it is really interesting, where maybe we don't necessarily need to get all the way down into the weeds, but it does change the way that we react sometimes. If you're dealing with an actor that wants to spend time in an environment, then we want to make sure that we investigate as fully as possible before we do containment. Whereas if it's somebody aggressive, containment is the primary goal. But what is consistent across most of them, as we can see from this data, is data theft. When we're called in to do our investigations, the first question is, how'd they get in? And the second question is, what did they take? And so that's something that we spend a ton of time investigating overall. And honestly, with the introduction of AI, that part is the scariest part, because you think about the way that you use AI in your day-to-day. You use it to summarize your work. You use it to find all of those documents that you've been diving around in your OneDrive for ages, or that email from 3 months ago. And if organizations aren't going through DLP adoption, labeling, understanding what their data is, where it sits beforehand, this new technology is giving the threat actors the ability to find those assets, find that sensitive data, like way more quickly than what they used to be able to, which is kind of scary in terms of things if organizations aren't going through that DLP adoption before AI adoption.
So, Meaghan, once attackers are inside a system, how long are they staying?
Yeah, I'll grab the clicker from you. Thank you. So this year, for the MDDR, we dug into the details of 2 important values when it comes to analyzing the motivations behind the threat actors conducting these attacks, but also how well equipped the victim organizations were to respond. So the first one that we're going to dig into here is the overall length of threat actor activity. So this is the number of days between the earliest evidence of threat actor activity that we were able to identify in a network and the latest. So this represents the full length of time that a threat actor was active within an environment that we were able to prove during our forensic investigation. When looking at the chart on the slide, the horizontal lines mark the median duration in days, And the rectangular boxes and the vertical lines indicate the range and the distribution of that range where we had the data points to provide it, basically. Interestingly, the research and academia sector recorded the longest average duration of activity, while the telecommunications sector recorded the shortest. And at the other end, we see government with a median hanging around the middle of about a week, but an incredibly large range, where at the short end we have less than a day, and then at the long end we have a total length of activity of over 3 years.
Yeah, so when we talk about this confluence of areas where both nation state and cyber criminal actors might be targeting the same. We see that particularly in research and academia and government too, and that's why these two represent kind of outliers in a way. Research and academia, the title of this talk is what works, and for research and academia, it's kind of what doesn't work, in the sense that research and academia, there's a lot of IP that nation-state threat actors might want to take. Obviously, there used to be ransomware actors that specifically went after universities. So again, that confluence of targets, but in an environment where there's sprawling infrastructure that's not managed very well. There's not the budgets being put towards cybersecurity. And so this isn't, again, a degradation of these research and academia institutions that aren't prioritizing cybersecurity, but we see that this is kind of the impact, right? Is that we have these really long threat actor activity periods where they can sit there for a long time, take advantage of that unmanaged infrastructure, and do whatever they need to do before they're finally identified.
So Meaghan, when you look at DART, so detection and response teams, incident response data, what controls really helped organizations limit damage and recover faster? And where does the data surprise us in particular, or maybe contradict what we thought we knew?
Yeah, so one of the other things that we looked at throughout the report this year was the dwell time. So one of the interesting findings that we've had over the past year or so is that as these threat actors move faster, increasing pace across the industry, they're also using an increasingly aggressive attack chain. And as a result, early detection of these intrusions is critical for organizations that are dealing with them. Taking a look at the dwell time across sectors, that's the number of days between when the earliest evidence of the threat actor was identified and the day when the customer actually identified that they were compromised. So how long a threat actor was able to live in an environment without being detected. Taking a look at the graphic again, we've got the same breakdown by sector. Again, the medians are those horizontal lines going across the bar, but we see a much more varied set of values for those medians compared to the previous value. Last slide was all about a week, but here it's kind of all over the show. Research and academia, again, has the longest time to identify that a compromise actually occurred. Again, speaking to those points that Karen just spoke to, where even though research and academia are really responsible for housing sensitive information, IT and security isn't the priority. So it makes things a lot more difficult for those IT teams when they're not exercising incident response plans. They don't have the tools that they need to be able to respond. On one hand as well, the longer dwell time can also speak to the actors themselves. So maybe it's a threat actor that doesn't want to be detected. Again, the sector is really a target of that, where they want to gain as much information as they can over a long amount of time. But one of the things that we in incident response have dealt with for a long time, for the past couple of years, is threat actors that just don't care about being detected. They're moving faster than we could ever hope to be able to detect. And so for them, detection, they know they're going to find them, but whenever we detect initial access, they're already 2 steps away from impact. So at that point, dwell time doesn't even come into the equation.
Right, it's really that question of, are they doing a smash and grab, right? In which case it doesn't matter, or are they going to sit in that area? And this kind of brings back this idea of this proactive defense, right? Once they're already in, maybe we can slow them down if that's something that we think will help us, but ideally, we have to have everything in place to immediately alert when there's that breach. Of course, we know antivirus, EDR, having a SOC, but really having that proactive planning, having done having that book of, okay, if X happens, then Y. Here's who we call. Here's the chain. It's something that our industry, of course, has talked about for years, that just we're a bit slow to uptake. You don't want the first time you're running incident response to be like the actual incident. You want to have game planned it, tested it several times so that it's not hair on fire, it's hair's a little bit on fire, but at least we know where the extinguisher is.
Proud about this one. All right, Karen, a question for you. If organizations could implement only one data bag change tomorrow, what would have the biggest impact? And what should leaders be measuring a year later to know their cyber risk is truly improving?
I'll tie those together. So if we have some MDDR fans, for years, we have our recommendations, but the primary recommendation we've always made is use of multi-factor authentication. And this last year, we updated that to phish-resistant multi-factor authentication, so passkeys, smart cards. And what Microsoft has always said, that use of MFA reduces identity-based attacks from being successful by over 99%. So a lot of times we're thinking about things at an enterprise level, right? Like if we use the metaphor of a castle, we're worried about the castle walls and the moat and all these things. But what we're seeing is attackers are pivoting to individuals, right? So if we can protect our workforce by using MFA, we do a lot to help ourselves by cutting off a lot of these initial access vectors. So what I would say is they can track use of MFA by workforces and uptick in implementation of that.
Meaghan?
Yeah, I think from an incident response perspective, something that Karen touched on before is exercising your capabilities, like actually going through the motions of, yeah, writing an incident response plan is super important. Everybody should go through the motion, but actually testing it out, going and running it through the ringer, understanding exactly what's going to happen. Incident response in general is much more a people problem than it is a technology problem. And making sure that you understand how your teams are going to respond makes it all the more easier for folks like ourselves when you call us in to help, so that we know, like, you're the experts in your environment. We need to rely on you to have a calm head and know what you're doing in order to get you back on your feet.
All right, Karen, last question I have. And yes, Meaghan, do chime in on this one too. What's one thing you would either warn senior decision makers about or recommend in general? And what do they need to be aware of as we go into, well, we're kind of in 2026. We have some more time left in this year.
So last year, we started putting into the MDDR discussion of AI. 2 years ago, and then last year, we started talking about all the ways that threat actors could use AI for attacks. And of course, it can be used in the entire attack chain. At the time, there was this sense of the theoretical, but it will be exponential uptick. And a lot of these AI technologies, the way we see them marketed in the commercial sector, increase your work efficiency, do summarization, things like this, we will absolutely see that, and we already are seeing that. So when we talk about these initial access vectors pairing social engineering with phishing. I mean, this is something that AI, lamentably, is perfect for, because it really reduces the burden on the threat actor, really economizes their time, and enables them to do these sorts of things at scale. So to kind of tie back to what I was saying, like, yes, AI can be used, of course, to identify CVEs and exploit vulnerabilities and do all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, you might have, someone in your company who clicks on a phishing link that was preceded by 4 exchanges of social engineering emails. So for me personally, what keeps me up at night is this idea that we are going to see a lot of these AI-assisted and even autonomously run phishing campaigns, social engineering campaigns that will be able to access not just enterprises, but individuals too, because I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation, is how does this impact people, not just companies?
Meaghan?
Yeah, and I think I'd go back to the governance and the visibility piece earlier. As companies and organizations are adopting AI and providing and allowing their employees to spin up their own agents for things like that, you need to keep pace with governance alongside it, because tens, hundreds, thousands of agents now being introduced to your environment overall just multiplies your attack surface in an insane way. And again, it's something that a threat actor can use just as well as we can and make their attack chain all the more faster. So making sure that security teams are educated and empowered alongside being able to do that innovation is incredibly important.
Well, thank you, Karen and Meaghan, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for existing, because we wouldn't have a secure world if we didn't have you in it.